Toby's iPad.
Yeah, I don't understand why that is.
Yeah.
I can't see my face here yet. Let me see something here. Start video. There we go.
There we are.
Hi, Earl.
Hello. How are you?
Good.
Awesome.
You have a head behind you.
Right there.
Yeah, don't knock it over.
It's pretty stable, but yeah, it's
sure. Oh, that's your drowning painting behind you.
Yes.
Yeah, that was good. I like that.
Glug glug.
Ah, well, it's funny now.
True.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was. It's actually going off to the printer to be scanned tomorrow, and then Tuesday it's going into a show. So,
what kind of a show?
The Art Association of Harrisburg puts on an annual exhibit called Figuratively Speaking, and it deals with the figure as subject. And with this one, the viewer is the subject, but I cleared it with the curator and she loved the idea, so it's going in the show.
Cool.
So
cool. Good deal. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I'm going to for a second, okay, to see if okay, I see what I'm doing there.
Yeah.
Okay. You try different things.
Right. And I actually, this is the room in the place where I live that has the best light. And unfortunately, this time of day, the sun's coming right in and giving me this great big hot spot on the side of my face. But I played around with the lighting for like 10 minutes before you got online.
It's crazy. I do a number of Zoom meetings because I'm involved in a couple of organizations. And I have this ritual where I'm at my little table now and I have to stack books, certain size books to a certain level, and then put up a tablet backing and then a tablet. And then I front light it with my little desk lamp here. But if I slid too far back, I'd be like you. I had light coming in from the window.
Right.
So, and you learn this all the time. I've done a lot of meetings where it's just like my mouth because I didn't raise enough books.
Yeah.
Have you done an interview Zoom for your series?
I did actually Jennifer Drinkwater.
Zoom.
I did a Zoom one with her, and I just finished editing it Monday. So that will be going out on my YouTube channel, and it's like an hour and 32 minutes long or something like that.
Mackerel.
We have a lot to talk about. It was, these are. I'm sorry.
I'm just impressed that it's that long.
Well, the format is intended to be a little more in depth, and it's intended to give the viewer a fly on the wall perspective of two people talking shop in a field most people don't have much experience with. They see stuff on the wall and they're like, oh, that's cute, that's pretty, I think I want that for my home. And they don't have a concept. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be denigrating to people who view art.
Voice, don't they? They all sound like that.
No, they don't. I was very unfair. But this is one of the other things that I like about these interviews is the organic spontaneity of different types of chemistry mixing. And you and I have always had a non-circuitous chemistry.
Yeah. It's like, did you ever see the cartoon series Space Ghost Coast to Coast?
Yes. And
he does these interviews and they're really clunky. There's gaps and there's spaces and the questions aren't answered right, things like that. And that's part of the charm of that show. We could do Earl Coast to Coast.
False start number 2.
You're editing, so we're okay.
Yeah. So today is the 17th of February, 2021. And we are joined by C. Arthur Croyle from formerly Iowa State University. And first and foremost, thank you for agreeing to be one of the people who is going to be interviewed for this series. I discussed this with Jennifer, and the point of doing these interviews is, as we said a moment ago, to give people a fly on the wall perspective into a shop talk between two people in a field they don't typically have experience with. But it's also a selfish thing, because in the time that we're in, I find myself cut off from a lot of other artists, and you kind of tend to go a little stir crazy in your own mind. So making an interview and looking into someone else's temporary madness is a bit of a relief.
I guess you could call it temporary madness. Okay.
But C. Arthur Croyle, do you want me just to call you Arthur from here on out?
Yeah. Okay. Sure.
Arthur was the Doge, D-O-G-E, Director of Graduate Education at Iowa State University when I was there getting my master's degree. But more importantly, and this is one of the reasons why I wanted you to be part of this series, and you and I had a couple of conversations. You were the first person that showed me how to present my work to a group of people who had no idea who I was and put my best foot forward. So thank you.
You're welcome. They were surly people, Earl.
A lot of artists are.
I mean, in those days, what I would do is I would collect the applications like yours, and then we had a graduate screening committee. And sometimes, this isn't true, but it was my impression that they were trying to outdo one another at the level of being surly. And I was always like, no, this is fine. This person's fine. And, they would start, and it's like, oh, I heaven help us. I can't stop them. I just can't. And it was quite a little bug tussle in those days. It might still be. The program, I think, that you graduated from is a little smaller than it used to be. We're on a big growth spurt in those days because we were getting encouragement from the dean's office to make it bigger. But and a lot of people matriculated through. I'm impressed. I snoop around a little bit because, well, that's what we do. It's the day of our COVID, and we snoop around. And I'm impressed how many people have gone in and gone out, and it's like, wow, I don't know who they were. They seem pretty good. And it chugs on, which is always a relief, because there are things I've been involved in that just, they're gone. I mean, when you get really old.
So we're not old, stars are old, but within
Sure. As an organism towards the end of its cellular reproductive phase.
I love it.
Then you see things come and go, like your old grade school is like torn down and it's just a green. It's like, they can't do that. So it only exists, in your head. And subsequently, all these things, classrooms or buildings you went to in college are gone. New buildings are up, new faces, new faculty. That's the first big trauma. The first big trauma is the people you remember who made an impression on you or with whom you did battle. And with me, there's a lot of people with whom I did battle, either have retired or passed away. And sometimes I hate it when my greatest enemies have passed away, because the cosmos is not at an equilibrium. I need an object of loathing out there somewhere. Exactly. And when that person passes away, it's like, damn it, who am I going to
foil with?
Aim all my anger at now. So, but that's part of, I guess, the whole thing, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's Jennifer and I talked about this at the tail end of our interview, which wasn't that long ago, less than a month ago. And Iowa State's not using the downtown branch on campus.
I know. Oh, that was a killer. Oh my God. So many people took credit for that thing. But they're full of crap. I was the key figure, along with the associate dean, a fellow named Marwan Gandar, which is great because the name denotes like a floating head that you address when you need favors. And that's how I always pictured him. I'd go in and ask for assistantships or graces or classrooms, and the floating head would grant those. Or sometimes I just have to shake him and it would say, try again or something, you know. So
that's hilarious.
But the two of us, really, I found that building, and then Marwan and I went down there, and it was just the state. In fact, it wasn't in disrepair. They were quickly putting apartments up. They were building apartments where the studios were. They were putting in walls and things. And then we said, wow, we're really interested. We made him stop. And then he talked to the dean, and then they had to tear all that stuff down when the college took a longer term lease out with it. But it became a victim of, I guess, the COVID and, you know, the budgetary crisis associated with that.
You know, and that was, I don't know how I would have done grad school without that space. It was a place of isolation that was separate from the rest of the college. I still had classes on campus, but it was this kind of privileged, sequestered space where people in my own grouping were all wrestling with bigger issues and didn't have to pin ourselves down with undergraduate mess.
Yeah, it was your exclusive space. I kind of saw Santa's workshop. I was hoping you guys wear all red caps or something, but I don't think that would have flown.
When this branches out beyond the people in my immediate circle, I don't know how the chemistry is going to work, but the chemistry between the people I know, it's all different. So every one of these is going to have a different flavor.
Yeah.
But, I went over all the information you gave me, which was visually a tremendous amount, and I really appreciate that. As a person who's in the reason I'm really interested, and we'll get to this, in talking with you is because you have a different perspective on art making. You were an academic. You probably still are in terms of mindset, but now you're in a space where you have a lot less of the restraints socially.
Yeah.
And I'll be curious to talk about this when the time comes, about how that's changed your work. But the first thing that I wanted to discuss was you had a very interesting upbringing in that you grew up in central United States and had that kind of provincial upbringing, but then you were also splitting your time between Germany. And that is a completely different culture. And I was wondering if you could tell me about how that helped shape you, not only as a person, but also as an artist, because you saw a lot of different influences, obviously.
Sure. Well, you know, that's really a good starter question, Earl. You're on top of your game. I'm impressed. Because seriously.
I thought so much less of you, but now.
No. You got to the core of it. Okay, so I grew up in Akron, Ohio, and at the time that I was growing up, it was still active as a industrial center, as a tire manufacturing capital of the world.
Goodyear, right?
What? Yeah, Goodyear, Firestone, Goodrich, General, all of them were headquartered here.
Okay.
And there was stuff being pumped out into the atmosphere. I'm sure we'll make sure I never live to see 75, but we all grew up there. And it was very urban. It was middle, where I grew up was middle to lower middle class, working class, factory stiffs with some few elites mixed in, doctors and lawyers. But, you know, I went through the school system in Akron from kindergarten through high school. And it was super blue collar. That's a term they used in those days. And I was really disconnected. That's because of Germany. So my parents moved into what now is called, for a while it's called inner city, but the neighborhood was always dangerous, but it wasn't deadly. Now it's deadly. Dangerous means you got beat up a lot. Deadly means they shoot you. From dangerous to deadly in my absence while I was out, teaching and while I was an adult. Well, anyway, so I grew up there and it was reasonable. And I started going to school to the local college, the University of Akron, which is right in the middle of Akron. And eventually, after a year of general studies, took a test because I didn't know what the hell I wanted to do. And the test said I'd be a great member of the clergy, but I was agnostic on a good day. So that was out of the picture. The second thing said something about creative artist, which terrified my father and mother because her father was the artist. Okay, so every other year, I'd go visit my grandparents in Germany, in Bavaria, rural little town. So not only were they in Germany, but they were in a town of 3,000, which was an agrarian, picturesque, drop-dead gorgeous agrarian little town. And then I came from a Rust Belt smoky city. So it was urban to rural, and then American to Germany. And I like to tell people the two countries were much further apart then. They were further apart culturally.
Right.
People in Bavaria had a hard time speaking German, let alone English. They spoke Bavarian. And so you were really the colored cow when you came in there. And in effect, I was like a little rock star because I was a novelty, real novelty. And so I lived there in the summers, and then I would come back to the inner city, Rust Belt, and continue my education. The difference was so profound, meaning that I was so overwhelmed and happy to be in Germany that when I came back to the US, I slept walked through 13 years of public education. I don't even know if I was there. Gave me a degree. I graduated middle of the pack. You know, if there were maybe 400 people in my class, I was probably 200, you know, and then started University of Akron provisionally because I was just a kind of, in those days, they awarded a full range of grades. You know, not like today, like A, you're good, B, you suck. B was like, well, you're almost good in those days. So, but started provisionally, and after my first, in those days, quarter, I did fine, and I took to college. Like, then it kicked in. Then it was like, oh, this is for the money. I have good genetic background material. I just was sleepwalking for 13 years. So, but the German part was the big influence. Is this answer too long, Earl?
No.
Are you sure?
Yeah, I love it.
Okay, so the German part was this. My grandfather was a working artist at a time when you could be a working artist. And that meant that before World War II, he was a BFD. For your viewers, that stands for big. And then the war uprooted his life. They had a live-in maid. It destroyed his apartment in central Berlin. He fled with he had one child, my mother and his wife. They fled the Soviet zone because the Soviets were really into retribution, raping, and pillaging. And my mom was 16, 17, so they had to get her out of there. They moved to Bavaria with a very slim connection because I was occupied by the Americans, who, believe it or not, were the most benevolent of the invaders and allied forces who occupied Germany after the war. They were behaved. They were the models. The other countries were a little hot under the collar, what the Nazis had done to them. But in America, the only things we lost, the people who paid the ultimate price were all fighting the Germans. They hadn't been abused by the Germans as an occupied territory. So the Americans were benevolent. He moved his two women folk to Bavaria, and he set up shop. He restarted his life at 65. So when I came to visit him as a child, and I came, I think, at first at age 3 all the way through to 18, like every 2 years. And sometimes it was 4 months, and sometimes it was 6 months, and I knocked off a month from that ho-hum sleepwalking education, which didn't help, but it was fine by me. So I learned German, and I learned one thing I saw with him is I was there long enough I could see his daily routine. He adapted to this small town, and what he did is he did all creative commissions except 3D. You know, he could do he did watercolor paintings and sold them. He did portraits in oil of people commissioned. He came in, he sat, he painted them. He did graphics for the small businesses. He did big graphics for the festivals, folks festivals, and other festivals they had there. He did everything so he had an income, because he had really lost the lion's share of his income stream in World War II. It was hard for him to apply for reparations because Germans didn't understand what artists did, especially academics. He was a teacher for as longer than I was, well, about the same time. So I had the ability as a kid, I shouldn't say ability, the opportunity to see, I get up in the morning and I knew what he did in the morning, his creative stuff. In the afternoon, he'd have certain meetings, consults, people would come in, they'd sit, they'd haggle prices. And he kind of went along until his death around 93 with commissions and painting and drawing. And I have to remind myself that you could do that in a rural town where there's no competition. And there was a vacuum. There was a place for just enough creativity, but not breakneck creativity like in New York or Berlin, And so that worked. But what I did see is before I went to college, I had in my head how that routine would be. I never really emulated it, but I knew, bits and pieces through my life, but I knew this is what you'd have to do. You'd have to have this discipline. You'd have to have your 4 to 5 hours of creative work every day. And then you would have a couple of interrupted hours where you're haggling, people are coming in, you're taking notes, you're doing a sketch, you're having coffee with them, they leave. You say, I'll have it in 2 weeks. They'll get it in 3 weeks, that sort of thing. But I saw how that worked firsthand. He had a little studio, lots of pictures hung up all over the place. And, I could see, I even realized what he could do well and what he couldn't do well. But he was broad-based in a time and a place where you could kind of bump along as a self-employed artist. Yeah.
That's really fantastic. And I appreciate the deep insight into a lot of these things. What I really appreciate about your narrative is that you had this example of what a working artist, non-glamorized, non-idealized example of a working artist life could be like. And that was so completely separate from all this other stuff. No one back in the United States had control over the influence here. And that is really fantastic. And with that narrative that you just went through, it helps me to understand how your graphic design, because that was a big step for you going into graphics, had such a heavy-handed Bauhaus influence.
yeah. I don't know if it was through my grandfather. I'm just a heavy-handed type of guy.
Well, when I was looking through your graphic work last night, it's clear the watercolor, that came through. But a lot of your design work, your choice of fonts, your choice of layout, it was very Germanic in that idealized sense of the word. And that makes sense because you had this influence that was not something that the United States could offer.
What I learned after the fact, Earl, at that time, my grandfather was my grandfather. I could poke his belly and make him laugh and do grandfather. It wasn't just this uber figure. Although I did recognize that he had cachet in this little town. He was known to have been a deal before he moved there. And we got like good tables on Sunday at the restaurant. You queued up socially they would put you where you were socially. We're always in a good place. And people would defer to him and, professor this and doctor that. He was neither a professor nor a doctor, but he lived with it. And he actually, what I discovered years later, it became my research topic for a number of decades in graphic design, because I only knew him as that guy, my grandfather, and what he had done later, his second career. But when I discovered his first career, he was a forerunner of the Bauhaus. And in fact, he really knew those guys. He worked with them before they founded the Bauhaus, wow. Which was a mind blower. He passed away, I think in the mid 70s, 75, early 75. And then I got these chests of paintings and drawings and correspondence. And one of the things was a little handwritten birthday card by Walter Gropius. Certainly missed the old days. Boy, I hope you're having a great birthday. Here's a picture of me in New Jersey or something. That what? And so when I started doing this research, he worked with the guy who was the director of the Bauhaus before he was a director of the Bauhaus. And they worked side by side as assistants to a guy named Peter Behrens, who was Gropius's teacher. And they worked in the studio, and they did some of those hallmark things you read about in general art history, like the Vegas factory. My grandfather was a graphic designer for that, or the Turban factory in Berlin, a hallmark architecture. He knew those guys, and some weird stuff. Like he did magazines, and he collaborated with Laszlo Moholy-Nagy on the cover and things like that. But I didn't know that at the time. But maybe it's a genetic thing to always put things at right angles, huh?
Well, that's a hell of a conclusion to come to, but sure, why not? It works.
I do that today. I've got a little Post-it and 2 pencils lined up in a asymmetrical yet rectilinear balance next to me.
My viewers will have to look up what that actually looks like, because it's very descriptive and very specific.
Well, as long as they don't look up rectal linear.
Right. Not by itself.
It's recto. Yeah.
So, actually, this is a great place to bring into the next question, which is, why start off with graphic design?
Oh, okay. See, I had to belt out that cow-like sound. Okay, so when we would drive over hill and dale in Germany and Austria and northern Italy, because we'd take my grandparents on vacation a lot, we'd always rent a car, and we had it all summer long, and later I would drive the car. We would talk, family talk, and that was a que sera around moments a lot. I was young. It's like, what are you going to be? What will be sort of thing. And my grandmother would always chime in at the end of all these, bloß kein Künstler, which in German means just not an artist. And chimed it in enough that it burned its way deep, deep into my brain. That's what I was going to be, because that must be something. So when I took those tests and said you need to be creative, at that time, my mother still wielded a great deal of influence, because she was alive and a powerful, powerful Germanic woman. She said, well, you're going to do anything creative, it's going to be at least in commercial art. That preceded the term graphic design. I said, okay, I can do that. So yeah, I majored in graphic design. At the same time, though, I couldn't stop myself from doing paintings and drawings. I love to draw the figure. I do that until the COVID thing came along. Every Friday we'd go draw figures here. We have a co-op in a group I belong to. Love to draw figures and do an occasional painting, a big painting that told the world I could paint, they can't, sort of painting, So I would still do that, even though I was majoring in graphic design. And the tilt of the graphic design was more towards illustration as an undergrad, that I took as much illustration as I could. So the first jobs that I got full-time out of school as a graduate, I would say maybe it was, like 30% hardcore design, type specking, laying out type, doing that, and then 70% like drawing something. And in those days, industrial montages were huge, which is like, get all your industrial stuff. And I think I sent one to you.
Yeah, you did.
And then it fronts. And I ended up out of undergrad, I took my little portfolio. In those days, it was the mid 70s. Okay. You take your portfolio, you dial on a phone, sometimes a rotary phone, you'd set up interviews, and I would do 2 to 3 a day in the summer interviews. And I probably went to about 60 places, and I just went up to Cleveland, because Cleveland was the big dog here. That's 30 miles to the north of Akron. So I was living with my parents. I'd drive up to Cleveland, have my interviews, come back, and be browbeaten by that strong Germanic woman known as my mother on how did it go. And it wasn't going well the first month or so. And then finally, after about 60 interviews, which was like a couple months after I graduated, I got 2 offers at the same time. One was from an art studio in Akron, and one was from a printer of industrial rags. They had like maybe 24 magazines that addressed specific industry professions and concerns. And I took the one in Cleveland because I was tired of listening to my mother's voice, because I knew I'd have to move to Cleveland. And so I did. So I did. After a couple of weeks, I moved to Cleveland and did that a couple of years before I went up to grad school.
So that actually, there's 2 segues in there that are becoming themes that would emerge, right? What are the commonalities and themes from this person's life to the other person's life, and so on and so forth? And there are 2 things in that narrative that you just went through that highlighted 2 of the common themes. And those are how there are so many times in every artist that I've ever met, every person's life, where people are like, don't be an artist. And here are the reasons you don't be an artist. And they're doing that because they think they're doing you a favor. They're trying to talk you into something that's more stable and less, volatile, something that, and all that does is deepen our need to seek psychotherapy. Well, the subtext to that common experience is, regardless of what we do, there is a compulsion in us to create. And I would like to, and maybe this is a good place for you to address that and talk about why you switched from graphic design to fine art.
Sure. That's a long story, Earl. Okay.
Go for it.
I would say in the simplest way, you need a way of switching from graphic design to fine art. One of the things I've discovered in retirement is that a lot of retired graphic designers picture themselves at the easel. They want to paint. And they become pretty good painters because at least they've got that design composition thing right from the start, right? So it's a matter of mastering the medium and then deciding what they want to paint. And people who don't approach it and already have a background in composition, that bedevils them. Even very good artists, one of their biggest challenges is the composition of a painting. All the strokes might be there, the expression of feeling, the color theory, all of that might be there. But you go like, well, why did you put this thing over here in a corner? So I didn't think about that. Okay, so you have the composition. But what I also had, there was never an evil plan. It's just, I'm always surprised how I tumbled through life, and I thought I was going to tumble right into my grave till the COVID hit. And I thought, crap, a giant roadblock to my easy life. But going back to your question, sorry.
No, I love it. I love it. That I was hoping we'd get at least 2 or 3 Arthurisms in there. That was great.
Well, as it stands. So then when I was interested in image making, as opposed to arranging, the illustration that I had done over my earlier years, quite a number of freelance jobs. I had some clients and had some people running my work down to Cincinnati when I lived in Oxford and so forth. And it was never very good. I wanted to be a good illustrator, but I was, on a good day, a competent illustrator, but not good. But good enough that I could make some money at it. But I learned the mediums. So citing things, drawing, faces are a big, people and faces are a big subject in illustration. And then going through watercolor, acrylic, oils, pastels, and things like that. So I had my hands into these artistic 2D mediums, and I had that composition thing. So when I began teaching early, I began teaching as a graduate student in Indiana University, like you did, as a grad. And then Then I taught at Miami before I came to Iowa State. And I taught there for 27 years, which just takes my breath away. 27 freaking years. Holy mackerel. Anyway, back it up. So it was, it wasn't where I began in graphic design. And within a 5 or 6 year span, I wasn't comfortable in their design program, but I was tenured. I got tenure there, and I had a full-time job. And at that time, getting tenure had a certain guarantee, a certain status, and it was hard as hell to get. You gotta do a lot of stuff to get tenure. I had that, but here I was in graphic design. So at that, I didn't get along very well with the department head. I didn't like him at all, and I'm not going to mention his name. So he got a Fulbright to go to Poland for a whole semester to study posters. Poland is world renowned as a great poster place. So he went over there, and in his absence, I somehow convinced the standing chair of the whole department, hey, I could teach beginning drawing in fine art. And she acquiesced. So when the head of graphic design came back, I was just about out of graphic design and into fine art as a foundations instructor and a beginning drawing instructor. And while it was a step down because I wasn't working with grads or teaching junior and senior level courses, it was a relief to me because it was new, it was fairly new subject. Whenever something is new, you know how it grabs you,
right?
And you're excited. That's how I was. And so I did the drawing for a while, a long time. And like beginning drawing and beginning foundations. And that's the only time I did 3D because there is a strong 3D element in it where they had to do both additive and subtractive sculpture, small things, you know, we have to pour a plaster thing and create an abstract thing and then add the additive things and so forth. When I taught the drawing, when you teach it long enough, they go like, well, you're not a flaming disaster. You could teach the second drawing too, without the wheels coming off. And so I did. And then what came out, I did some paintings. As soon as I was in fine art, I was compelled to knock out a bunch of paintings. And they're really so-so, but competent is a word again. Some of them were competent. And I had, at that time, a fellow named Bruce Smith, who I will mention, very dear gentleman, painter, look at him to give me some guidance so I wasn't pissing in the wind. You know, I just like, hey, look at my paintings. That's not like a painting. And he gave me some good critiques and I shaped them a little bit. And so slowly that led to me teaching watercolor. And I taught a lot of watercolor at Iowa State because it was an extension of a medium I had worked in illustration. And there's a strong drawing element in it, citing. So then now I was teaching beginning drawing, middle drawing, and watercolor. And then over the years, it said when they were down painting faculty, because Brenda Jones was always going to Rome, and this was before Drinkwater was on deck, another painting faculty, before we even got Brent Holland, we didn't have that many. They said, well, you know, watercolor isn't that different than other painting. It is painting, so why don't you do a beginning painting class? So now I was teaching beginning painting, watercolor, drawing 1 and 2, and that was a lot of art. You know, I mean, that was the art area. So that's where that was. Now, where do you want me to go from here?
Well, I was going to ask what was like, but I don't know that this is important. I think I'd rather focus on the painting aspect of it.
Everything is important, Earl. Everything is important.
So I'll touch on it as a way of making a segue. But when I was going through the work that you sent me, the sample work that you sent me, and looking at that, one of the things that I looked at and took notice of was that your early graphic design illustrative work and the work you did in Rome, and even the work you did, the watercolors that were from looked like they were landscapes from Western PA Western PA, Eastern Ohio.
Yeah.
There's an ease of composition, and when you were talking about how composition was one of your strong suits in graphic design that allowed you to segue into fine arts, that was just an exclamation point, because that was one of the strongest things that I looked at was, observing your paintings and going, wow, those compositions are so tight but loose. Like it's not a step out of line and we're going to cut your toes off type of rigidity, but it's an inviting.
There's toes laying all over in here.
Toes laying all over. But there's just an inviting natural alignment to your composition. Even the one of the mill with the truck parked out in front, and I'll put an image of that up in the video. The mill with the truck parked out in front, you have that ramp leading up, and that ramp, without that ramp, that composition would feel distant, far away, and detached. That ramp is that lead in that pulls the viewer into the composition because it's a brighter color and it's at the foreground of the painting, and it leads from the outer edge of the canvas into the internal. And it's like this guy just gets composition, and you can use composition in a really complicated way and just make it look super easy. So that's not so much a question as it is a statement, and hopefully an observation that allows us to tie graphic design into fine art.
I can comment a little bit on that, if that's okay.
Please.
Hey, I'm the interviewee. Whatever.
Yeah. You're E.
One of the things, going back to that Bauhaus thing that you seized on, which was right on, that was dead on.
Thank you.
Is the Germans really pioneered something called asymmetrical design.
Yes.
The classical thing since Gutenberg, where something as balanced design, where if you have something on the right, you have something on the left. And so books for hundreds of years were beautifully done, but balanced. Ornamentation, decoration, borders, the way type was centered, or if it was blocked, it'd be a block on the right, block on the left. The Bauhaus really pioneered, or they were disciples of asymmetrical design, which is, let's say you have a flat surface, okay? And you put 3 or 4 shapes, objects, type, photo, something on it. They can be arranged in a way that they're balanced, but there's not a verso recto sort of way of looking at it. That one little red spot on the upper left might be balanced by a big black and white fuzzy photo down at the right. So all of a sudden, it looks like it's balanced, but it isn't like you're doing the same thing over and over. And if you work with that long enough, and I worked with it with design elements, not art elements, design things, then somehow when you do something over and over, it becomes part of how you look at things, Yeah. And when you're talking about the artwork, I just wanted to scream, they're lies. They're all lies. That's all we do. We just tell lies, because if you go to any painting and go like, boy, that's exactly how it is, and you zoom into 2 square inches, it's just a muddy mess, It's just
right.
a lie.
But I intentionally, and at the beginning, I didn't understand this, but this is a good segue into something that I wanted to discuss about your paintings too. I intentionally don't structure my work. What I mean by that is it's color laid against color. I don't do a lot of blending and mixing. I use the tension of complementary or contrasting colors to create boundaries. But the idea being that helps to evoke emotion, but also that it continues to be an interesting piece all the way down onto a micro level, so that you can keep going in, and then that muddy mess, as you described, becomes an interesting mini composition, almost like a Rothko.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Well, the reason I brought that up is because when I look at your paintings, and I don't know if this is a phase, early phase or a middle phase or a late phase, but for example, the child sitting in the chair.
Oh, that was early, middle, early.
Okay. You used a lot of color choices there that looked at least on the first glance, to be, oh yeah, easy. But those are really complicated color choices that you use to create that reflective light, especially on the right side of the child, left side of the image. There are a lot of really unusual color choices there to create that mood, that lighting situation that that child is sitting in, that I looked at and went, oh yeah, I get that. I mean, I can identify with that.
I have a
So
story.
please.
When you get to be old, you have a lot of stories. I need just a couple of other old farts in a Cracker Barrel to be sitting there with, you know? Okay, here's the story. When I worked in Cleveland, I commuted to work from a suburb, and this involved going out a street, waiting for a bus, taking the bus to the end line of a rapid train, taking the rapid train into the central part of Cleveland, which was Terminal Tower, then clattering around with a bunch of other people. You can almost hear Bachman Turner's song, Working Overtime, and then getting on a bus and going to the building. So the one-way commute was an hour and a half. It was going well, could be 2 hours. And during that time, for some reason, that was right after I graduated, it came to me that I didn't know anything about color. So I took it upon myself to read the most boring text by Faber Bieren, Johannes Itten, Joseph Albers, and Johannes Goethe, of all people. Yeah, that Goethe, on color theory. On color theory. And their color theory was always on blocks. I mean, it would tell you what's supposed to happen. And Piet Mondrian at least had some imagery when he wrote about it. But you'd be looking at squares on squares and it'd be different colors and what happens optically. And while I was doing it to impress myself, the end result was that in the back of my head, I really was beginning to build a working lexicon of why you use dominant colors and what they did. Warms, cools, complements, triadic schemes, tones versus shades versus tints. And people are always, even to this day, somebody say, here, to this day. So I was taking a shower and using a shampoo for my remaining hairs. And on the shampoo bottle, it said, tint your hair 2 shades lighter. And it's a good shampoo, but it drives me batshit crazy because a shade is the addition of gray or black. Right. So some frou-frou designer thought this would be a killer term to shade your hair lighter, two shades, on a scale of what? What the frick scale are we using, let alone misusing the word shade? To this day, because of these books, I'm very critical of a tint, tone, shade, what those mean, and then how the colors interact, but in a theoretical sense. And I do that to this day. Quite often I'll underpaint a painting in its complement. And if it's not a direct complement, near complement. And then I'll overpaint it, and it allows me, then it gives you extra punch, but it's always, you're painting against something, right, as opposed to paint on a neutral surface, kind of like what you do, And so, yeah, that's something that came from those days of commuting, because it was either that or make eye contact with somebody and get robbed on a train.
Well, heaven forbid we take social risks.
No social risk in this guy.
All right. Inadvertently, we've covered a lot of the questions that I had.
But they're good ones.
What's that?
They're good.
Well, good. Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, here's one. When you started teaching at Iowa State, you said that 27 years you taught there. From my own experience, I worked in an industry that changed a lot in the span of about the same period of time in my life. And I don't recognize it now, as opposed to when I first started when I was 14 years old. Can you tell me about how the field of teaching has taught from the time you started teaching to just right at the time when you retired?
Oh, Earl.
Oh, did I open up a can of worms? Oh,
Funny, you asked in an email whether I'd be comfortable with the questions first. And I said no because of this, but that didn't stop me from reviewing some of my own life before I talked today. You know,
yeah.
look at something, I go like, huh. And other times I just put it away and a tear will come out of my eye. Teaching is it's a really complex, funny animal because I don't think I was never bad and I was never good. And some years I was good and some years I was bad. Some people have the teaching gene, the instructional gene in them. They are natural teachers. They'll just jump on any opportunity to help disseminate, help people. They light up when they can instruct people. I wish I was one of those people. I really lit up when I could like build a program. Maybe you're aware of that, or direct something. I felt that I worked really well with exceptional students, but they're exceptional because they're so damn few. So if you're really doing well working with the minority of students, you got yourself the Green Party there. You're never going to win anything, you know?
Right.
so I can look back and go like, oh, look, there's a couple dozen students I really have a strong relationship with over how many years? So, that's a problem. So that's kind of where I came from. I think my connection to teaching was through expertise, meaning that I enjoyed subject matter and I was excited by creative subject matter, but love for humanity at large was lacking. I wish I could have had more of that, People changed, absolutely. Just before you arrived on the scene, I had quite a reputation as a hard ass, epic hard ass. I rather enjoyed it, but it didn't wash anymore. It didn't wash socially. It didn't wash institutionally as the institutions became more desperate for students, accommodating, and put under social pressure. So the old, that guy's real hard ass story began to wither and die because you really wouldn't survive when you're working with so many individuals and so many classes as an overall hard ass. But from the time I began teaching in the 1980 until about the year 2000, it was hard ass Croyle. I could just, and I could do it and survive in an institution. It wasn't like I was just going out to be a hard ass, but I didn't have to bend to student cajoling or please. I had this way, I felt it was right, and I didn't have to bend. By the year 2000, and I'm just using that date loosely, it wasn't like something happened in the year 2000. Right. I began to be more cautious. And by the time you graduated, the last few years, I was walking on eggshells. The reason I was walking on eggshells, because there was a generational gulf. It's like looking down into the Grand Canyon. It widens. As you go through teaching, you become older and your students stay the same age. They can't help it, but you become older and older. So the cultural reference, semantic, the whole gap becomes deeper and deeper. And you could say something really wrong or strike them the wrong way inadvertently. And boy, I was becoming a non-personality. I was just doing everything I could, pulled in all the wings and everything and went to my classes and gave them nothing but what they needed to know. There were no more Croyle the hard ass, colorful stories. You made me cry, but it was worth it. That sort of crap. It was like, that old guy, can you get a handle on him? No, that was on purpose because people were just being hauled into the dean's office and all sorts of things because the public became very skeptical of higher education and very demanding of what it wanted. And the culture changed because of technology, because of all sorts of things. But that was really hard to survive those last few years to retirement because here's an example. Okay. I was in Rome teaching one semester in Rome. I taught several semesters in Rome, but one semester, one of the last ones, we had, it was graphic design. It was 2005. Last year I taught graphic design. And I was in Rome, and the students, there were 35, 40 students that two of us were in charge of. And they had accommodations where they were housed in various apartment complexes contracted through Iowa State University. Well, you know, they ran into all sorts of problems because sometimes they were belligerent or loud, or they lost their keys, or got in trouble with the landlords. Well, one small clutch of female students had gotten into such trouble because they were partying that essentially they were thrown out of their housing. Okay. Now, how did I find this out? They wouldn't tell me, because those are the waning years of my hard-ass stone. They called their mother, who called the dean, who called the program director, who came down and alerted me that that person I'm talking to right now about some sort of logo design is homeless today. What are you going to do about it? So that shows you the quick back and forth email, text message chain that can happen. And that relationship then with a student was way different than 1980, where a parent isn't getting hold of a superior who's getting hold of a lesser superior who's getting a hold of me to apprise me of what the student could tell me, who's sitting right there next to me.
Wow.
Who's not telling me. So that was really typical. So that's how it changed. Before it was you and a student. And on a rare case, a parent would rear their ugly head. But now it became, parents became advocates for their students. And I mean, not with me, with everybody. We're quickly part of the equation, particularly undergraduates, you know.
Yeah.
Wow, what a long explanation, huh?
No, it's good. I mean, I think that academia is one of the first places to react to the need for social change, and the need for social change has been a long time coming. I mean, you know, I had a bit of this conversation with Jennifer in the last interview, that we see the ivory tower and what's happened to it in the last 10 to 15 years is a much needed self-examination. And it's just an interesting place. And I understand, as a 50-year-old man, if I were to go into an academic environment, I'm old school enough that I don't know how that would fare, because a lot of the things that just I naturally do are considered probably fairly inappropriate in a higher education environment in today's day and age. But 10 years ago, completely different story.
That's right. That's right. And, you know, that's just the social stuff. There's also the issue of what you create. You know, when you're teaching anybody at the university, you become a role model. And we did, you know, we had some classes where I think I almost remember some of these lessons myself, having dispensed them. You know, what is the conversation of the day? When we say that, a larger conversation, what is society worried about? How do artists react to it? How do they comment on it? What do they produce as a reaction to the conversations people are having of the day? And I think that's really hard to continue that as you become older. You're still trying to wrestle with the conversations of yesterday. And so for me, retirement's been great creatively, because I can reprise and really augur into some things, some movements that I don't have to reflect or think about how do they relate to students. You know, because a student will say, well, let's see what you do, Mr. Hotshot. You know, and you show them, it's like, you know, when you hit that key and it's just a thud sound on your computer because it doesn't go forward, it's inactive. And it's like, well, I don't think your stuff's so great. That's boring, you know, and they'd be right, because it's not in the conversation of their day. They're going to say, And when you interviewed, who's the fellow you interviewed in Iowa?
That's actually my cousin. His name is Brando.
Brando. Brando was referencing things that I wouldn't reference, but were more germane to the conversation of today. You know, if students want graffiti, animation, Korean, Japanese, Chinese, if they reference superheroes as a point of departure for lampoons, if they want to do real time or video or things with sound, how can I possibly help that? My things don't have sound, you know? Right. So I understand those are their conversations. That's what they go home to. That's what people across the globe are doing. So that's another thing that weighs heavily on you. You can be successful in your little world. You can be in a show, you can be in the down at the Iowa Center of the Arts. If you're in Iowa, here you could be at the Butler Museum for American Art. And you go like, I got into Butler. People are like, oh, great. I'm really happy your steel mill got into Butler. But, you know, are people who are majoring art 20, you know, early 20s going to go in there? It's like, nah, they're not going to go in there. You know,
right.
They're concerned with other messages, other imagery, other way of producing imagery. You know, even painting, you know, teaching painting can be so painful because what you're doing is like introducing someone to eating oysters. If they don't eat oysters, it's like, this is really good. It's like, ah, that looks like crap. So you keep browbeating them, and after a while they say, this is really good, but I'm not going to eat this when I'm out of this situation. You know, it's like, okay. So, you know, when my colleagues back at Iowa State are teaching painting, they're showing them all these pictures, right? They're doing all these presentations and they're showing them the world of painting. But most of these kids want to react to their world differently. They'll do the painting. They'll even do good paintings. But if you give them a choice, they're going to choose some other medium and some other form of expression. Yeah, so
that's fascinating because I saw a little bit of that when Iowa State changed the name of the program to Integrated Visual Arts, which then I was in the only group that graduated with that actual technical degree, because then they changed the name of the program to adjust for another social wave. And you know, you talk about and I'm going to use this word, the contextualization of the art field, and how everything has context now. I mean, you consider, you know, whether or not your pencil is made of graphite versus made of a man-made material. You consider, and all these things are part of the conversation. And maybe I'm a simplistic person, maybe I'm just not that bright, but it seems to me there were, you know, the artists have had the wolf chasing their heels for centuries now. And I look back, and when I talk to people, I use this as a way of conveying an understanding of why art is always forever in search of the new next thing, but it gets to be problematic. And I think what you're addressing is the problem area. But there were three inventions that changed how art related to itself. The first was the Gutenberg Bible, because prior to that point, you know, artists were employed by the church to take the stories of the Bible and put them on the walls so people could understand pictorially what the Bible was being taught by the person who was speaking. And that really changed, because when people became literate, they could read for themselves. And then we had the rise of the middle class, and the artists became employed by the wealthy people to do paintings of their private mistress that they would, you know, keep in their place. But then we had the photograph, the daguerreotype, and art had to take another step back and say, okay, what do we have that the photograph doesn't? We have size and we have color. And ever since then, art has been saying, you know, we've been caught off guard a number of times in world history. We're not going to be caught off guard anymore, and we need to be on the forefront. But that gets to be problematic, because now the funnel has opened so wide, everything is fair game.
Yeah.
And how do you make, I mean, I think that that's problematic if you're trying to be a world-class artist, in the sense of saying, oh, I'm going to be, you know, I'm in my 20s and 30s and I'm ambitious and I'm going to conquer New York and then Tokyo and all these great art world
Right.
scenes. Or you can just say, you know what, I'm going to do what I do and make a living out of a niche that I can carve out for myself.
Yeah. It sounds like you chose the latter.
Yeah, but you know, I mean, yeah, I'm trying to contextualize this stuff, like what I
No,
want to do.
it's absolutely true. And that's why when you said, well, what about your abstract stuff? And I'm sorry, I couldn't upload any. That whole abstract thing for several years was a response to what you're referencing becoming more current. Now, when I retired, I didn't do that anymore. And the one thing you pointed out, that hyena painting,
I love that one, by the way.
it's like the last vestige of that type of art because there's drippy shit in it and it's square. But, and that was from a hyena that stopped us in the road at Kruger Park in South Africa. Anyway, that was the last time I said, well, you're going to make a trip. You gotta let the viewer in on the secret. You got to reveal what's behind the curtain. You got to do all this stuff for the viewer. And I really became inculcated. I had to use that word, Earl, in the culture here. And I definitely in my work am reprising the great American painters, William Merritt Chase, John Sloan, Winslow Homer, people like that, George Bellow, yeah, in my own work, but it's slightly modernized. But it seems I'm in the right place. You know, you'd be in the right place too. It's harder to do in Iowa. You don't have the landscape, the cultural scape. Here you have it. And you can do that, and I can live with that, and other people can see that. But if you're teaching people in art school, like I said before, their reaction would be a bland one, because that's not their world right now. That's not what's coming across the screen to them. So yeah, I understand exactly, you know, what you mean if you're young and you want to be all over the place. And I still go to some of those shows. You know, I still go to some of them. You know, and I should be careful because I'm really dating myself. You know, I can see Basquiat and go like, whoa, that's crazy. But now he's history. He's part of history. Pick up history.
And he's considered boring.
Yeah, yeah. And, you know, I've seen shows when I get a chance that are pretty contemporary and they broaden my horizons. It doesn't mean I'm going to emulate that work. It doesn't mean at all. But at least I know what the range of art is that is out there, you know.
One of the things that, and you're right about Iowa, and Jennifer and I talked about that, about, you know, just north of the border, you have the state that spends the most per capita on art in the entire country. And just to the south of Minnesota, you have this place that's like, well, no, we're not going to do that. But, you know, I lament the fact that with this broadening of the funnel, the term artist can be thrown around so flippantly. Like, I was at the Des Moines Arts Center, which is a wonderful building. Sometimes I question their choice of featured exhibits. And one year I was in there and they had an artist who was doing installation work, and this person had taken the piece that I reacted negatively to is this person had taken like 20 different brooms that were all different colors, and they arranged them on the floor in a pattern, and it was just a circle, and the colors were, and you know, taking something out of context, and very Marcel Duchamp kind of way, but not nearly as authentic, because you know, he was the first one to do that. But I remember just being vehemently, almost angry, spitting bile angry, that here were these brooms in a circle on the floor, and this person called themselves an artist. And because they had the gall to be able to do that and say, I'm going to get away with this, the Des Moines Arts Center put it up, and they actually got away with it.
Two things came to mind listening to you. Two things. Back to Des Moines Arts Center, I also saw a show there by a new artist, and his name is a German, Anselm Rails, not Kiefer, Rails. And I think his first show in the U.S. was at the Des Moines Arts Center. And it was, shortly before I retired, maybe 6-7 years ago. So it was a arrangement of 3D relief work and then in the round sculpture. And it was super impressive because it looked like art of the future. Everything was very beautifully produced. You didn't quite know how he did it. You know, he would take junk and then recast it in aluminum and then super plated in lacquered color. So it kept removing it. Yet you could see a bicycle chain, but it was so many generations removed, for instance, that it became its own thing. And then he did some more abstract work, kind of like Noguchi, but Noguchi in the 21st century. And you said, wow, this is impressive work. I sure as hell am not going to do it. But it seemed to be like 3D work. You could walk around, you could feel, you could get a sense of it. And it was going in a new modern direction that you could accept. I've seen shows like what you've commented on. And the other thing triggered, I thought being an artist in Iowa is like being like Kevin Costner in Dances with Wolves, being stationed out there by yourself on the prairie. You know you're still in the Army, but you don't have any evidence of it. And, you know, that's almost a transition of like, when I moved here after retirement, hey, you know, I'm an emeritus prophet at Iowa State University. It's like, yeah, University of Iowa, that's a great place. Okay.
Whatever.
It really was the side of the river. Might as well be like on the dark side of the moon, you know?
Yeah.
I'm over it.
You know, I love Iowa for a lot of reasons, but its ability to embrace the arts is definitely not one of them.
Yeah. And so in a way, at least at Iowa State with some of my colleagues, there was a healthy creative desperation in their work. They stayed in current given where they were and how long they were there. And they still do good work. But I always think it's like, but will anybody know? You know, tree forest thing. Will anybody know? And you know, that brings me to hear how different the artistic community I am in now is from the one I left. I was telling my wife today, one of the things when I reflect in advance of this interview about what I'm really surprised about is I'm surprised how much more I learned now in retirement. I didn't expect that. I thought I would write it out and do some watercolors and probably do less and less as time goes by because your ass hurts when you're sitting out there. And then I'd be done with it. But I really grabbed a hold of that Rust Belt post-industrial culture theme, plus some of the diversity that's here that I think is probably very similar to what you have in your area. And it's deeper. People have lived here longer. The history's deeper. The remnants, the archaeology is more prevalent. That you can do that. I didn't expect to do that, but I am. And then, you know, the art culture, like I said, that's really different too.
Well, that's fantastic because I was going to ask you, one of the major questions and the things that I wanted to get to in this interview was, how has your art and your perspective changed now that you're no longer in the ivory tower? And that's a great place to discuss that.
So we're the last people in the world that are beginning to watch the episodes of Schitt's Creek.
Okay.
Familiar with that show?
Yeah, I am.
Okay, so there's one of the earlier episodes. The woman comes in, and she was a former low grade actress, diva singer. And there's an orchestral, a singing group. And she says, well, I did all these things. And they have this wonderful small town. So what? We don't understand. We don't care. That's the same thing I received here. So I came in like this diva. I think I referred to this briefly. Say, well, here, I think I sent my resume to the president of Akron Society of Artists when I first joined. And that was, again, that moment. It's a resume. What is this all about? And so I had to back up for several years and say, how do I become a member of this creative culture? It's different. In academia, we just look at the resume. In fact, we do wonderful mishires based on resumes. It's like, look at the resume. That person's great. And then they show up and it's like, they haven't spoken in 3 weeks. Is that part of their thing? It's like, I don't know. But here you have to show yourself to a very provincial group of people, meaning Akron is not a destination through which a lot of people pass. It's a place where people live, they're born, they live, they die here. And so when you come in from the outside, they don't have a mechanism like a college town for incorporating that. So instead of that resume route, you have to do things like hang blinds, move art, clean out studios, serve on this board, serve on that board, jury a show, slowly get your feet in there until you're familiar. And then you magically begin to win shows. It's like, well, I'm still the same artist. It's like, yeah, but, they're looking for the name, that sort of thing. And you go like, well, that's not kosher. I'll cash my check. I'll take the prize money. I'm not going to ask questions. So that is really different. And the artists are different. There's a whole, if I can comment on those for a moment.
Please.
At the university level, an artist who teaches attempts to stay current, and it's a meritocracy. They do paintings. They want to get into shows that have prestigious jurors, and hopefully they want to win an award. And then you take the jurors' comments in your award, you put them in your annual report, which I don't miss it all. You submit it to the chair. The chair goes, oh, that's really nice. So I will give you an extra 0.5% pay raise income because you're really doing good work. And so in a way, you do more work so that you can get it more recognized, so you can get more recognition in your position, and you begin to earn more money because you're all that. You're all that. So
I really appreciate the 2004 reference.
Right. So now getting more money, and all the other people are talking were a little jealous, And I remember once there was some show, something I got in. I was very proud to get in it because it was a tough show. And I presented it to my chair, in my report. And she said, well, that's nice, but maybe it was Jennifer, or maybe it was Barb Walton got an award. It's like, oh, fuck. They got the same damn show. That negates what I did. There goes my raise, So it's like that. But here, where people aren't teaching, they're actually, many of them are making a living as an artist. So they grind out work and they sell work, and they're just, there's no vehicle that's below them to promote their work for a potential sale. I think, and I went over the people I know, and I know so many more who work that way now. They're very good. They really know how to manipulate the medium. Almost all of them have established a signature style so that if you buy this, you buy that, who did it over the decades, over the years. But they probably have either inherited or married or a prior source of income that gives them their foundation. Because as you probably discovered, you'd have to sell an insane amount of art to have a high yearly income.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And the few people who are really pushing their stuff produce dozens, if not hundreds of paintings a year, and they get them out the door, and then he'd do it again. And I can't do that. Right. I do them slowly, meticulously, and then try to undo them. It looks like it was easy.
Right.
And then I said, the best income stream I could ever have, and I don't win many shows, Earl, is that a painting wins a few $100 and I keep the painting, as opposed to selling it. And now I don't have the painting and I'm never going to win anything with that again. So, I haven't sold a lot of work. I think here, hardly anything at all, because now it's a name. You got to be here a few decades and like, oh, I know that name. My sister-in-law has one of his pieces in the kitchen. So why don't we buy one? Right. And I've been to a gallery, a sales-oriented gallery, and it didn't matter. Walked around my little nameplate on the openings and had chit chat. And the pieces that walk out the door for sales are the ones that people have been here for decades. They continue their sales. And even at that, I would say it's flat. They're not going to make a living selling their art. The biggest selling artist here has to have a supplemental and or other income.
That's a fascinating thing. Again, this is one of those emerging themes that talking with Jennifer and talking with my cousin Brando, talking with you, and I'm sure pretty much every other person that I'm going to talk to in this project series is how do you make a living as an artist? And oftentimes the answer is, well, you have to have another job, or you have to be so incredibly stellar that you are not going to grant me an interview. And it's, so the approach that I'm taking with the work I'm doing now is to have multiple revenue streams. That's really, again, going down the path of the beginning of the interview, providing my viewers with the idea of, hey, we're going to talk shop and you're going to get a chance to listen in. This is part of that strategy, is to build these interviews and offer them in different formats. But it's incredibly, incredibly difficult. And the subtext of this discussion is how easy visual information becomes free commodity for everyone, and then how difficult that is if you're the producer of that imagery to monetize that. And it seems to be a shame.
There's what I've seen a couple of approaches. Again, here I've seen approach. There's one woman who the group I belong to, Akron Society of Artists, has a studio in a county building, 3-story county building. And the county has a director of the studio, and there's many small individual studios there, but we keep our full-time studio there. And most of the people who have a studio there sustain themselves in art. What you can do, and what this one woman does, is she'll make a very intricate line design and then sell it as affixed to all sorts of affordable things: pillows, vases, coffee cups, posters. So you make one piece of art, you affix it to things people want, and that's your income stream. That's your primary income stream. So let's say you do half a dozen pieces of art and you cleverly put them on things that people would buy anyway without the piece, but now you've got some art on it, right?
Yeah.
That's one way. And the other thing is people are cashing in on big is I'm in a certain age bracket, the boomers. Mm-hmm. And boomers are the last group that have large disposable income and discover their creative appetite when they retire. And so a number of artists run these things where they go to Italy or France or Germany with a gaggle of 6 to 12 people on their heels, and what they paid underwrites their trip and their meals and so forth. And then when they teach them how to paint, we're going to paint Tuscany or Provence or something, they come back and not only did they get a free trip out of it and at least fed for a couple of weeks, but now they've got 12 buyers of their acolytes. Mm-hmm. And these people do it year in and year out. So they, a friend of mine who's the president of ASA, Akron Society of Artists, he does that. And when he has an open house in his own studio, he might have 50 people come in, former students, of whom, you know, half a dozen will buy something for the holidays, Valentine's Day, Christmas, so forth. And it keeps them going. Yeah. Not only teacher, we like his style. I kind of paint in his style because he taught me, that kind of thing, you know. And that's another way of doing it. But the trips are big, and then getting your design affixed to something that isn't precious and dear, but people would buy. You know, wind, you name it. But and that's a way to do it. But you got to be a busy beaver. You really, you really, you know. And then you have an overhead. You know, you have an inventory of stuff. And she has a big shop, and, you know, shirts and all this stuff. And people come in on the holidays, they bull rush, they buy all this junk, and that's her income stream.
You know, before I went to grad school, I did a lot of looking at the art fair circuit.
Yeah, the white van circuit.
Yeah, and I looked at that. And I had at the time a very cynical a very cynical view of what it meant to be on the art fair circuit, because going back to the types of people that survive, and I don't blame them. It's a tough racket. If you're compelled to create, you know, you try all these different things, and all of a sudden one thing starts to catch fire, and you spend all your focus doing that one thing, and then maybe you can eke out a living. Maybe you can even do well, but then creatively, what do? Do you evolve creatively? Because then all of a sudden your patrons are like, no, we don't want to buy that if it's different.
No, what I noticed, and, you know, Des Moines had a really good art fair. I still do.
Yeah.
And I noticed it's like, luckily I was never in the white panel van crowd, but is that set up your tent and wait for the storm. Because it seemed to be the more inventory you get out there, the more the clouds were building, and you would see your entire life tumbling across the bridge. You know?
Yeah.
Like, oh my God. So we went down there one day, and a couple of very good glass blowers. And I think I was looking at different tents, and I came to the conclusion, and I think anybody can, that most of these artists have found their voice. This is how I express myself. And then their inventory is the rinse and repeat offshoot. They might have 2 or 3 really stellar pieces there if they want to wager that and get them out there. And you're like, this is really good art. And then the other ones are these iterations, small scale, multiples applications of what they're doing. So they have that. You have to find your voice. And if people are like, oh, there's, rock. I need a rock this Christmas for Thanksgiving. I'm going to give it to my aunt, you know. So they do that. But it seems like from what I've read and the people I've talked to, it is, you can do it a few years and you just run yourself ragged. There's a lot of work involved. Tear down, set up, tear down, set up. As far as evolving creatively, I have not encountered somebody who's worried about that, because since it's a short-term thing, they maybe don't evolve for a few years. So what? At least they're selling some stuff, you know?
Right. Yeah. Well, I have my business mentor. He was the one that convinced me to put forth my work and get feedback on the social media platform. And I love the sculptures that I do and the work I do here. But, and this is getting to your point, I started to have a real identity crisis, because I was producing work in the 3-dimensional format that I thought was going to be, you know, really good stuff. And I'm getting better, but no one was reacting to it. People were reacting to my paintings. So finally one day I just asked people on social media, hey, here's 4 or 5 samples of my 3D work, and here are 4 or 5 samples of my 2D work. And overwhelmingly, like 80%, people were like, oh, your paintings. I'm like, really? They're not that good. But
don't be that hard on yourself, Earl.
What I don't think they're as accomplished as these are. But what I learned from that, and this is my point to this whole thing, is I didn't know what would resonate with people. And there's something about my color choice and the way I paint that evokes emotion from an audience. So how do you capitalize on that? So my business mentor finally got me to see, you listen to your audience and you offer them what they want.
I think I've heard this somewhere before. You know, one of the things with your 3D pieces, you know, sculpture seems to have had a larger audience share in prior times.
Yes.
And I can go up and we just about, when it's not COVID time, we just about live at the Cleveland Museum of Art. We're really lucky that it's up the road. We're members and so forth. And they have an impressive 3D collection, particularly Eastern. But you will not find many people in their prized collections of Asian art or some of the Western ones. You know, they got maybe 8 or 9 Rodins and tons of other Canova, Bernini, 1 or 2 big time sculptors. But you can usually go in there and smoke a joint by yourself if you want, because nobody's going to come in. People don't know now how to look at sculpture. I think because of the screens, they see that as 2D, and a painting will make a better presence on a monitor, a screen, than 3D, because you got to be with it. You have a relationship to it. You know, not only walk around it, but you have this relationship when you can't get that, but I can upload a painting and everybody can comment on it. But 3D is harder. It's a harder sell right now. I think partially because of the computer, and also it's out of our cultural sightline, I think, you know.
And that's part of the reason why, you know, one of the things that I want to do, I love making the portrait bust. It just gives me, and Jennifer and I talked about this, you know, this notion that she's cross-disciplinary as well. She does cross stitching and then she does her paintings. Yeah. And I can't choose between 2D and 3D. You know, there's different scratches or itches that they both satisfy, and they have to be scratched. But I also think a lot of it has to do with the fact that, you know, we as a people have seen 3-dimensional work and it gets to be root, right? It's like, oh, I've seen a portrait bust. Oh, I've seen this. They don't realize the work that goes into it. That's the reason why I'm striving to constantly present these in challenging ways.
Yeah.
I don't know if you saw the one that I did of Kanye West.
Yeah. Yeah, I did.
You know, that's gold leafed. And I did all that stuff because of a very specific moment in contemporary history. And that was my reaction to that event. But, you know, just it's taking it out of context, taking it away from something people usually expect. But then you're in the realm of the gallery and the exhibition, and not necessarily the sale of multiple pieces.
Yeah. It's tricky business, because you want to test your mettle. You want to see how good you can get, and if someone can recognize that.
Right.
And it's hard to do that and balance that against sales. You know, when you talked about the gold leaf Kanye West header floating David Bowie there, I'm always thinking about you know, when I said earlier in this interview that I look at more contemporary things. I think in 2008, see, we're going back that far.
Yeah.
I was in Amsterdam, and I saw Damien Hirst's diamond encrusted skull.
For the Love of God.
Yeah, For the Love of God. And, you know, he did the skull, and now, you know, you've got $55 million in diamonds in it. You know, it's platinum. And then he and an art consortium bought it, and they're keeping it like one keeps Bitcoin, hoping for it, speculating that it'll rise. At some point, he'll recover his initial investment and make a handsome penny. But the whole show was this: they built this room, and then the head was in it, and it was featured almost as if it was levitating. You know how you can control the lights, right?
Right.
And just hovering there. And then he pulled all this other artwork out that's in their permanent collection that had to do with life, death. You know, the skull has all sorts of ramifications. And then he has quotes. And the one that hung with me more than the head was this quote that we're born, we look around, we die. I love this quote, particularly that we look around. Of all the things you can choose, we look around. The sum total of our meaning, our purposes, we're simply like a couple of googly eyes looking around before we become grumpers. I can't get over that, you know? And that's hung with me more than his head. I mean, his head is spectacular, but I tend to be removed from the world of diamonds quite a bit. So, you know, it had that other worldly thing, but that was over top. And I thought, wow, if I got a chance ever to be so popularly glib, that would have been, you know, something I would have loved to say, you know.
Do you know how, and I don't know if this is an urban myth, but do you know how the Damien Hirst piece got its name?
Yeah, this mother.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for our viewers, why don't you tell the story?
Well, I think the thing was, I mean, it's a truncated story. You might have a better one that essentially she asked what his next project was, and he told her, and she said she was aghast. Oh, for the love of God, Damien. And he grabbed that as the title for it.
That's the story I heard.
Fit to a T, you know.
Yeah.
Crazy. Well, yeah. So, you know, I mean, you know, you've got that, and that's a head, and maybe a floating Bowie could be your for the love of God. Yeah, I have two sons, adult sons, you know, duh, small toddlers. Anyway, and you know, I think one would tolerate the bulk of my work for a period of time before the hammer came down and he'd have to extricate himself if I should die. The other one is just kind of flummoxed. He would take one or two pieces, but that's a problem since there's dozens of them laying around here, right?
Right.
So I'm thinking, I'm taking what you're saying and going further. It's like, good God, what's going to happen to this stuff? Mm-hmm. And to be honest with you, the last year and a half, I've been painting paintings that people want to buy, but I refuse to sell because I recognize they're among my better efforts. So I'm going to be kicking myself, I think, in the future when I'm down there in a cardboard box under the bridge, thinking like, oh, you could have had 2 nights at the Hyatt, you know? But no, you know, it's a weird thing. It's like, I'm making up excuses like, no, I want to keep this one and stuff. It's like, what, are you crazy? So it's a weird time. I would also agree what you said. You know, I don't want to leave the earth having pulled off some mediocre work. I want to push how far it could go. But, you know, that wasn't in the game plan 6 years ago, you know, when I said, I'm retiring, man, I'm out of here.
Well, I think that's brilliant. I mean, that's an exciting thing. I mean, you showed me when, you know, I love seeing artists' studios. So when you shared with me images of your workspaces, the one thing that stuck out was, man, he's got a lot of work stacked in various places. You've got a big closet. You've got I mean,
it's terrible. I know. Shoving it in there, and sometimes it's like you open the door and it all comes tumbling out. It's terrible. You know, and even this little desk has a story. I found it on the curb a few years ago. And the one I'm sitting at right now with you, talking to you. And I looked at it, it seemed kind of nifty, but it was missing some fasteners. So my wife and I were on our way walking downtown. We're within walking distance of one of those little downtowns that's like revitalizing itself. It's coffee shop, wine shop, bars, that sort of thing. So it's a destination point for a walk. So halfway there, we find this desk on the curb. Someone's throwing it out, trash. So we rush home, get the car, I put it in there. I eventually find the right fasteners and get it back together. And I'm leaning on it now. But what I like most about it is it was built in Yugoslavia, which no longer exists, and doesn't give me any clue which of the 6 countries it could have been built in. But, you know, made in Yugoslavia, it's like, oh, you know, it's like a mid-century piece from when there was a Yugoslavia. So I was really excited by that. So I'm sitting here at my Yugoslavian desk. It just makes the whole experience that much richer.
Well, experience is like the name of the game. And I think that's probably, if I could extrapolate onto a macro level, the art world has changed to embrace the notion that art is no longer passive, it is now experience.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yeah. And just to put a pin in the whole David Bowie, Kanye West thing is to contemporize something that people take for granted. Oh, it's a bust. Well, yeah, but it's now it's an experience. And that's where I'm pushing those to be, so that when it comes time for me to start to sell my paintings, I can ask a little bit more because I'm the guy that did the gold Kanye Buddha.
And you can float them and they can become a little short video, maybe do a 360 or something.
I also do memorial busts. And I
Yeah.
told this to Jennifer. I put the most recent memorial bust I did was of my neighbor. He died suddenly, left a widow. And so I did for his widow a bust of him, but then I put in the urn for his remain in the base, and it was a one piece. Well, everybody said, "Well, that's creepy. Why would I want a bust of my grandfather or my?" And I thought to myself, I'm going to take the Fight Club approach here. Do you know the story of Fight Club?
I know, I've heard of the movie, but I don't know the approach.
Okay, so and I'm not suggesting you watch this or whatever, but it's a cult classic, and it is violent, 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 violent. And it was rejected. The novel was rejected by publisher after publisher, 40 or 50, 60 different rejections. And finally, one of his friends said, they keep saying it's too violent. Why don't you make it more violent? And then it sold. So my idea is, you think it's creepy if I make a bust of your grandfather? What if I take this same technology and make your grandfather's head float?
There you go. Nice approach.
Yeah.
Now I have a good context for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's good. Yeah. Good to know.
So I've got one more question for you.
Okay.
And then really appreciate your time. And this has been a lot of fun.
It has been fun. I'm glad we could connect.
Yeah, this is great. Looking forward.
Looking forward. What happens next?
Yeah. Pie in the sky, however you want to.
Yeah, I actually, in the short term, want to continue painting in this sort of genre style. I want to test the paintings a little more in more prestigious venues that were called off because of the virus. So I have kind of a backlog of some work, I'm looking a little off to my side here. I've got a photo study of my grandson I'm doing that I'm going to do a large painting of. His canvas will arrive here today. And, it's interesting because I tend to do kids, but you saw the one, it was my granddaughter a while back. My grandson is a little different. He's within the autism spectrum. And so try to get him to sit still and work on a portrait just seemed anti. So what he does is we see him like every day. We go over there and relieve the parents for about an hour or so to play with the kids. So he does online school stuff, and he comes running down, throws himself on the sofa upside down and looks at you in an upside down way for several minutes to decompress. And it finally hit me. It's like, this is him. So I'm working from a photo where he's upside down. Your face looks completely different upside down. He's doing some weird stuff with his fingers that either look Indian or Buddhist-like that only he would do. And everything about this upside down, full-figured thing on the sofa is him. But it took me months because I kept going, well, you've done his sister, but with him, it'd be kind of a fight. I even did that with my own kids. The one that you pointed, that was one of my sons, the one with the yellow, purple. He was out, and his hair is just like,
Yeah, you could almost feel like the texture of his hair.
Yeah, he's like that. He's just really a very, not high strung, tightly strung person. He's a Delta airline pilot. The other one is very laid back. He's a programmer, and he's all snuggled in. I did a painting into a big quilt that's got the garish kid pattern, but each of the kid portraits is like your bus. What's the personality has to come through. I'm just not going to do a face. And it might take you months, takes me months to discover what's the right scenario.
Yeah.
What, because I could just do a face, but it's just going to be a face. Who cares? And so I think I see myself continuing to paint, make art. I'm very involved in terms of organizations. I'm vice president of this ASA. I'm on a public art board of this little town here, and we're going to determine what sculptures and public works go in. It just was formed. It's subsidized by taxes. Maybe judge a few more shows, but being involved more organizationally, because I have that luxury, because a lot of the people I described to you who make a living, they're squeezing in contributions to the art community on the side because they're still painting to try to make a living. I have a luxury, and it is a luxury. It's lucky that I don't have to do that at retirement from this 27 years. I was I got to tell you, there are some towards the end, like year 25, 26, 27, you know how shitty the weather is in Iowa, right?
Yeah.
Right now. Well, the weather's shitty here, but the only relief we have is we always look up how it is in Ames. It's always worse. Mm-hmm. It's always multiple times worse. So there were times I would pull into the college design parking lot, slide in between two cars, hold my breath and hope I stay upright on my way into college of design those final years. And I thought, I'm going to die between the car and I'll be frozen as a figure like David back there. Right. And it's, he never got to retirement. So luckily that never came to pass, but there were certainly times in January and February where I thought, this is the end of the earth. You know how it is there. Mm-hmm. The winds high. I remember we encountered a couple of Russian students who said it was colder than Russia because there was something in the air, maybe the humidity or something. Freaking out like one winter. It's like, God, this is terrible here.
It's hilarious because I live in Hershey, PA, and they have a dampness in the air that you won't find in Iowa, except for like a November rain or an April rain. Okay. But people here complain, and I'm like, really?
I know. That's, and they've been just kicked in the pants in Iowa this year with the rain. Oh. And else, they're hunkering down because they have a governor who doesn't believe in the disease.
COVID Kim.
They get this wind blowing everything they own down into oblivion. Now they have a hard winter. It's like, oh Lord, it's just not worth it if you could avoid it. I couldn't. They offered me a fairly decent job when I started. So I went down there thinking things would be fine. And they were, Yeah. Ames was a place. My kids got a good education there. But towards the end, I thought, wow. And not that living in Akron, Ohio is not like I moved to Paris.
Right.
But there are things here, and we take advantage of the things. We have a national park. We have Lake Erie. We go up to that a lot. We got the Cleveland Orchestra at Severance Hall. We listen to them. Cleveland Museum of Art. We belong to that. Big venues from the old industrial days when Rockefeller lived here. And so, we can still take advantage of it. So while it's not Paris, it's not Ames.
Well, I drive through that area when I go home to visit my family. So when COVID is over, I'll have to stop off in Akron and have a cup of coffee with you.
That'd be great. I'll take you to my favorite coffee place, which I painted.
Okay. By the way, I really want to say a couple of things. There are some works that I just found exceptional that I really love, and I think that it speaks to your style and also your education. The painting of the woman in the black leather jacket.
Oh yeah. That was a one-time session.
what I love about that, and this is where I don't believe, like people, when I was in my undergrad, I heard this a lot. Well, the figure's dead or painting is dead. It's like, no, you guys just have lost your imagination. There are ways to reinvent these things to make them contemporary and contextualize them. When I just kept coming back to that woman in the black leather jacket because you could feel her resignation.
That's right. And she couldn't live in Ames. That person's not in Ames. They live here.
Yeah. You could see that person had huge ambitions, massive rebellion, a lot of things that were idealistic in her youth, and at this stage that she was in, and her that station in life, she was just like, I'm still that person, but life has kicked me, and it could feel that.
Well, that's cool. And, yeah, I would agree with you. Probably the best thing that happened to her that week was the $70 she got for looking like that. Yeah, and we draw a lot of people like that. It's my wife noticed. I winnowed out my figure portfolio. How much more diverse our model base was than what we were doing in Ames. In Ames, there was just a slew of young, fit men and women, mainly women, in their prime, and after a while, you got a sense that boy, are you going to send these Playboy, or what the hell are you going to do with these? But you come here, and it is like man, woman, old, new, beaten down, glamorous, anemic, anorexic, overweight. Everybody's here, and the portfolio started looking like that. It's like, it looks like you've been drawing people from Akron. And
that's fascinating.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is, I mean, I love your watercolors. I mean, because I've done watercolor and I don't do watercolor well. Watercolor is so. I think what I'm impressed by the most is, again, how easy your stuff looks. You make it look so easy, but I know how hard watercolor is.
Smoke and mirrors. But there was a guy who influenced me heavily in watercolor. I'll tell you a quick story, and then
Please.
Okay. His name is oh damn it, Richard Scarry was his dad. Shoot, his dad was Richard Scarry, the children's book illustrator, did all the mice and things. Huck Scarry. He came and did a workshop with our students in Rome. And Huck Scarry has done a lot of books in watercolor of various cities in Europe. And his approach was the most unacademic thing ever. And I adopted it. And what it was, you did a drawing, you began right in the middle with the most important part first, and then you worked to the edges. And then no matter what happened, whether it was a rainstorm or someone bugging you or something, it was done. And so, in effect, I started working that way. It wasn't like, in academia, you spread everything around, you build it all up. No, he would do a light drawing, go right to the center, flesh it out, and then start going out. And as time allowed, if you have more time, be more fleshed out. If you have less time, you go like, oh, that's a nice detail piece. And so it's like, really? Our students are like, no, you got to balance. You got to do all this thing. It's like, no, I go right to the center. And if you look at some of those watercolors, there's like one point, and I fleshed it out. But I went in there, did that one point, brought it home, fleshed it out a little bit, it was done,
Oh. Well, I'm excited to see what happens because in your career, because there's I think this is an exciting period when you've proven yourself not only in the rigors of commercial art, but also in the rigors and demands of academia. And now it's like, well, now you get to work for you.
Yeah, it's fun. It's a good creative time.
Good. Well, Arthur, thank you so much. This has been a true blast.
Yeah, it's been fun. Thank you, Earl. It's been good.
Okay.
Thanks for everybody who's been who's that.
Let me try this again. Thanks everyone for watching. And I don't know who my next interviewee will be, but I've got about 15 or 18 people who've said they'd like to be interviewed. So it's going to be a little tricky with the COVID situation. There's a young gal who is about 9 years old. She's a daughter of my oldest friend, and she's showing tremendous creative potential. And she recently got her first commission. So if I can swing an interview with her, she lives not too far away from me. We'll just have to make sure everybody's not carrying anything, but I think she'd be a fun one to follow up with this.
Well, that's cool.
Yeah. So.
Wow. Well, good luck. Give Damian Hurst a call.
Well, Arthur, thank you very much for your time today.
You're welcome. Thank you. Stay out of trouble.
I'll just try not to get caught.
There you go.
Okay. I'll reach out to you when the COVID thing's over, and maybe when I'm driving through Akron, we can have coffee.
That'd be cool. I want to do that.
Okay. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.